Forward Sustainably is a podcast that captures sustainability insights from leaders across diverse industries and sectors. This podcast allows us one way to live out the Wisconsin idea, expanding the benefits of the University of Wisconsin system outside our walls. I'm Amanda Getch, Program Manager for the Sustainable Management degree programs at the University of Wisconsin Extended Campus. Today, we welcome Tom Eggert into our studio to talk about the current state of sustainability. I've been privileged to know Tom for over a decade as a mentor, a friend, and a professional colleague. Tom is the founder and Emeritus Executive Director of the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council, Emeritus Lecturer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in Sustainable Business, President of the Board of Wisconsin Microfinance, and former Green Tier Development Specialist at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. To me, Tom has always been a pragmatic and optimistic sustainability advocate. Tom, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. So let's just jump right on in here, and we want to know a little bit about your role in sustainability and how you got to where you are today.
It was accidental, in the best of ways, I think. I came back to the state. I had spent time as an undergraduate in the state at University of Wisconsin, majored in environmental studies, spent some time overseas in the Peace Corps, went on to law school out in Washington, D.C., wanted to do environmental law, went out to Montana, worked for the Attorney General's office in Montana. Our first two kids were born out in Montana, and both my wife's parents and my parents were back here in Wisconsin. So we moved back really to have the kids be closer to their grandparents. Took a job with the Department of Natural Resources, went back to school, and faced the challenge of figuring, do I want to go for a master's in public administration or a master's in business administration? And that choice becomes important later on. I chose public administration. So this was the mid 80s, mid to late 80s, that choice was made. Finished that degree and approached the head of the Institute for Environmental Studies at UW-Madison, which later became called the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, but it wasn't yet called that at the time. And they had a graduate program called Conservation Biology and Sustainable Development. So I was interested in the sustainable development part of that. So I asked Tom Ewell, who was the director at the time, what classes were being taught in sustainable development. And he said, Tom, we're not teaching any classes in sustainable development, but you work for the DNR. If you can get some release time, we'd love you to put a class together. And so I guess we learn best, or we teach best what we most need to learn. So I put a class together that was offered. So the first class on sustainable development at UW-Madison in fall of 1994. And approached it not from the natural sciences side, because there was lots of information on, sort of the various environmental issues and classes that were being taught, but really from the social sciences side. Where is leadership coming from? Why is it arising? How do we get more of it? How do students potentially influence the world as they're going out by associating with those leadership organizations? So my background was law and public administration. So I really thought I was putting a class together on the role of the federal government, the role of the state government, role of municipal governments, because historically, when issues came up, we as a society turned to government to solve those problems. I mean, examples are Cuyahoga River catches fire and, the Clean Water Act arises, or the Exxon Valdez crashes into a reef up in Alaska and the Oil Pollution Act arises. Interesting, I mentioned that last one. I think it's the actual last example of the federal government rising to address an environmental issue, and that was back in 1990. So it's almost 30 years ago that we have had no action from the federal government from a leadership perspective on kind of leading to address environmental or societal challenges. Anyway, I put this class together and really struggled to find examples that I would share with the students on leadership from the public sector. And so much of the class became about leadership from the private sector. So if you go back to the mid-90s, it was the Ben & Jerry's, the Toms of Maine, the Body Shop, kind of those iconic businesses that we think of when we think about kind of green and hippie and different, and Patagonia would be in that group also. It's not just Patagonia and Ben & Jerry's and Tom's of Maine Body Shop that are leading the sustainability challenge. It's Walmart, it's GE, it's, sort of the big companies, including many of the companies in Wisconsin.
I really enjoy and appreciate the fact that you talked about government leadership in kind of trickling off in the 90s when it comes to regulation and legislation from a sustainability perspective, and how that made a pivot into the private sector. And I'm not sure where you and I first met, but I was definitely on the path to more government work, nonprofit work related to sustainability, and somehow our paths...
As an undergraduate, and you magically appeared in my class.
And it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And really that changed my entire career trajectory. I got really excited about the power that is in the private sector, whether it be marketing, consumer behavior, production, supply chain, and the list goes on. I just got really excited to see the power that was there, and the innovation, the design thinking, the systems thinking that is within the private sector, and that just puts so much horsepower behind creating positive change. So thank you for opening my eyes to that.
So let me just talk about a couple of things real quickly. And brought to mind because I'm actually having a conversation with a prospective student this afternoon, and that's the question of where are we on this pendulum of government leadership? And clearly, sort of where we sit now, the federal administration has not shown a propensity to create a future that we're going to move towards. It's much more now focused and addressing problems that they perceive in the now, which is very different than, sort of in the 80s and 90s when government was responsible for not only seeing the future, but preparing the road to the future and, sort of laying that foundation. So, something comparable now would be climate change as a major societal issue. And government isn't, but could be laying the foundation towards transitioning from a carbon fuel-based economy to a non-carbon fuel-based economy, whatever that might mean, whether it's alternatives or nuclear or geothermal or whatever it might mean. But you see very little leadership from the government, installing solar or wind at government facilities to, sort of try it out, to work out some of the kinks or whatever. So the question was, should I, as a person ready to enter grad school, should I be looking at an MBA or an MPA? So where is leadership going to come from in the future? From the business sector, which it clearly has over the last 30 years, or is there a role for the government? And I really believe there's a pendulum, and certainly it has swung a long way towards business leadership. And I would argue, and I argued in class, I'm not sure that business really wanted the leadership that was given to it. It was required of them. Customers were asking them, what they were doing as far as sustainability to green their products. Investors were asking them. Even more significantly, young people were asking them as they were coming out of college. I mean, we've seen surveys of what young people are looking for in an employer. They want to work for a company that they feel like is making a difference in the world, and they want their job to be making a difference. They want to feel like they're part of that making a difference. Well, that wasn't something that companies really thought about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And now they have to be able to talk to these young people. If they want the best and brightest that are coming out of school, how are they going to attract them to come work for them? I mean, think about it in terms of how much more difficult is it for Exxon to attract the best and brightest engineer coming out versus Tesla? It's really... It's a challenge, and it's a challenge for companies that are in these industries that we don't perceive to be, environmentally friendly or as environmentally aware as others might be. So
definitely. And then you throw in record low unemployment rates and workforce labor shortages, especially in the state of Wisconsin right now.
Yeah.
There are a lot of companies talking about workplace culture, and I've seen an increase in integration of sustainability principles into that culture piece of employers as well.
Yeah, very much. I mean, let me just say a little bit about that. So the employee engagement piece becomes really important in a tight market, labor market like we have now. You don't want to be losing your employees to somebody else. So how do you capture not only their minds but their hearts? And that fits very much into how do we treat employees? The employee part of those 9 elements of the Green Masters program that has really risen in importance. I mean, business has gotten the environmental stuff, with the exception of maybe carbon. That I think there's still some questions as to what's going to happen with carbon, but you don't have businesses out there that are doing a bad job from a water or an air or a waste perspective. They know what the rules are. They follow those rules. They don't want to be embarrassed by not following the rules. But the challenge for many businesses is this whole new playing field of social issues that business now has to lead on. And what are they supposed to do, and how are they supposed to do it, and how are they supposed to talk about it, and how do they not alienate some customers by taking a position on something that is desired by other customers. It's a really interesting world for the business community right now. Let me talk about, we talked about the transition from the Patagonias, the Ben & Jerry's, and then in 2005, we had Walmart making some very public commitments to waste minimization, fuel use minimization, which led to the wings that we see on trucks and the little doors that open on the back, and tires that are not filled with air but with nitrogen. I mean, a number of innovations that together have saved significant amounts of fuel. And GE with their Eco-Imagination program, really focusing on efficiency. Anyway, once we had Walmart and GE sort of publicly declaring that they were on board with sustainability, it sort of led to the dominoes falling with a lot of other businesses. I think the next big, really significant step happened this week with the Business Roundtable, which is a group of the 200 largest CEOs of businesses in this country, and I think there are some from other countries also. They have traditionally, for their entire existence, argued that the role for businesses can be simplified to think about a shareholder capitalism, that businesses are there to enrich shareholders, their owners. This is a Milton Friedman argument that goes way back in time. It sort of captured in law, both at the national level and at many state levels. And what the Business Roundtable said earlier this week is that it is no longer expedient for businesses to just focus on shareholders. In fact, that's a losing focus for the future, that it is stakeholders that need to be focused on. So this is stakeholder capitalism is another way of thinking about sustainability. Maybe that's the evolution of the term, but you have the Business Roundtable, again, largest CEOs or the largest company CEOs coming together and saying, yes, it is about the investors. It is about the customers. It's about the employees. It's about the supply chain. It is about all of these things. And unless we focus on how do we integrate the treatment and the thoughtfulness that we need to apply to these other players, we can't be successful as large businesses or as small businesses. So you have this major step now that's been taken from one of the largest trade-like associations saying that the world has changed. And it is not just capitalism as we've known it, which is shareholder capitalism. We are now evolving to stakeholder capitalism, much like B Corps have done, or conscious capitalism companies, or other small subsets of the world. But to have sort of the largest companies, CEOs of the largest companies saying, yeah, this is where we're heading, I think that's really significant.
That's really great news to hear. Some upbeat and positive sustainability news for the week.
Yes.
Have you seen any trickling out of that news? Have you seen any comments or commentators?
So not nearly enough yet, but it's only been out for a couple of days. The B Corp community has celebrated it, saying, this is the kinds of things that we've been talking about for the last 10 years now are being talked about at a much higher and a much larger level. So actually, I think that's the only thing that I've seen about it. There's an article in Fast Company that just came out. I think you're going to see more on the national news, The Economist, as sort of the ramifications of this gets played out. But it's going to be a big deal.
Forward Sustainably is created in partnership with the University of Wisconsin Extended Campus and the University of Wisconsin Sustainable Management degree programs. Find us online at sustain.wisconsin.edu. Well, we've talked about the evolution of sustainability at the government level, in the private sector. How have you seen the ways sustainability is understood evolve in academic settings during your time at UW-Madison?
When I taught that first class in sustainability back in '94, it was something that I was interested in, and there were enough students that were interested in it. The university is a peculiar institution in that they very much respond to student interest. And so as students started thinking about what is this sustainability stuff, what difference does it make to me, how might I play in that field, that demand led to sort of the rise of far more classes, ultimately to a sustainability certificate at Madison, the programs that you're running, sort of becoming institutionalized in the academic world. But I really credit students with that evolution, that it wasn't some smart academics that said, oh, here's a trend that we need to get in front of, and we'll develop some classes and they will come. It was really, I think, students saying, no, these are things that we really think are important to us, perhaps as a generation. Climate change seems to be one of the generation-defining issues for Generation Z and millennials, maybe even Generation Xers. So, all right, if these are big issues for us, how do we play in them? What do we need to know so that we can actually feel like we understand what's going on and perhaps make a difference? And I think it's those kinds of drivers that led academia as a whole to continue to say, all right, what is it that students want, and how can we provide those kinds of resources or that kind of training or that kind of experience?
Something that just came to my mind was the pendulum that you had brought up earlier.
Yeah.
And, we're living in such an increasingly complex world. We're understanding more about the world that we live in. And the drivers behind these changes are always moving, and they're all over the place. So you've got our natural ecological boundaries being exploited. You have social systems being exploited. You have new generations coming into the workforce who have varying values than generations that came before them. So talking about preparing future employees for the needs of businesses into the coming decades is just an interesting way to think about all of these drivers pushing on each other and what's really driving change.
So yes, there is the employees at existing businesses and how to hang on to them, how to attract them. But then there's also the young entrepreneurs. And so I was meeting with someone earlier this week, and we look at the big challenges that are, that exist for us right now. Let's say climate change. All right, so if we agree that climate change is a big issue, I think we can agree that 10, 20 years from now, we're probably going to have solved it or at least addressed it in some way. The alternative is it's not good, so we tend to be more optimistic. All right, so if we agree that we're going to have addressed it in some way, then the question is, well, who's going to be at the head of addressing it? Is it going to be the government, or is it going to be at business? And I think we can probably say at this point it's probably going to be business that's going to be at the head of it. All right, then we say, well, those businesses that figure out how to address this, they're going to make a ton of money. And wouldn't you like to make a ton of money while saving the world? And it's like, what student says no to that? I mean, this is the best of all worlds, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel really good that I've done something that, we've cut carbon emissions, we've sucked it out of the atmosphere, we've addressed these carbon issues. And if business is doing that, somebody's making a ton of money. Why not? Why not me? So that's, I think, the really exciting part about saying that, business is leading on these environmental issues. Because business will. I mean, if there's a need, there will be some businesses that'll fill that need. That's just the way capitalism works, right? So the businesses that fill that need and do it successfully are going to they're going to be very successful. So why not try and associate yourself either as a startup or, sort of joining a company like that to benefit from the fact that we're saving the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's really what got me excited about looking at the private sector and sustainability. Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of innovation and filling those voids where there are needs in the marketplace, from your perspective right now, what is the most innovative thing happening with regard to sustainability? And this could be business models, products, technologies, and so forth.
So I'm going to answer the question from a slightly different perspective and then try and weave my way back to the question that you've asked. So when I'm asked by young people about where should I invest, I want to invest to save money. I talk to them about, figure out what are the major themes where things are going to be happening over time. And sort of alternative energy is one of those. Battery technology, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. And so if we want to depend more on alternative energy, somehow we have to capture that energy when it is being generated so that we can use it when it's not being generated. Battery technology is one of the linchpins yet that when we solve that, we'll be able to move much more quickly beyond fossil fuels. Artificial intelligence, come up with whatever the themes are. And then we don't know which companies are going to ultimately be successful. Another theme would be sort of the transportation sector. And, I think we probably are evolving beyond internal combustion engines, whether it's Tesla or electric engines or hydrogen engines we had talked about, under the Bush administration. That evolution is occurring. So just betting on internal combustion engines wouldn't be a good bet for the future. Betting on the next generation, whatever that might be, would be a good bet. Figure out, sort of what's of interest to you. You're not going to be able to pick the winning company, but you can pick that, that in this particular area, somebody's going to win. And so can we invest across that whole area? Because we don't know. The constant criticism of government investing in startups is, you're never going to be able to pick the winner. Well, that's never the point. It's it's kind of trying to support the sector development overall. So you have the big sustainability challenge captured in kind of these memes or these themes, and saying, all right, as we define these challenges for the future. And again, think back to what we were talking about before. We wanted government to be doing this definition. What are those challenges and what does that road look like to the future? If we can spend this much money, the interstate transportation system under the Roosevelt administration, World War II, there's a vision that we would have roads that crisscross the country and the government was going to play a role in that. And there was going to be benefits to the states and to businesses and to people. But it was government that provided that vision. So without that vision being provided by government for the future of where we are now, we have businesses doing the best that they can, albeit that's not always. Their interests are very narrowly focused on what are they good at and how can they maximize those kinds of things. So trying to sort of see how business evolves, and then arguing for there really should be a role for government, some guidance provided by governments because of the limitations of businesses providing leadership on this.
It's very inspiring, very innovative. So as we wrap up here, I would like to ask you if there's one tool or a piece of wisdom or advice that you'd like to offer to our listeners today, whether they be emerging professionals, current students, people looking to make a career change, or just our neighbors who are out there wanting to contribute to a better future.
Yes. So let me say that I think what I would want to convey to people is that our individual decisions matter. Whether those are individual decisions on what to purchase in the marketplace, whether those are individual decisions of where we're going to invest our retirement dollars, whether those are decisions of where we're going to live and what kind of house we're going to live, and I mean, those kinds of things. And yes, there is the, sort of the counter argument that, what one person does really doesn't make a difference. And I could be living the most sustainable life in the world, and unless other people get on board, it's not going to make a difference. I'd argue that it really does start with individuals, and one person can make a difference. And so viewing each of the dollars that you spend going into the market as votes for the companies whose products you're purchasing. So if you don't want cheap plastic stuff that is imported from China, then buy better quality stuff made by companies in the U.S. or from a country that you want to support. It's really, we're in this very interesting transition time where young professionals are going to be getting all kinds of money from their parents and grandparents, just as that wealth transfer takes place. Well, young professionals are very values-based. Does that extend to how they make investment decisions? Their investment advisors aren't going to tell them that you can invest with your values in all of these different ways. It's going to be them asking their investment advisors, nope, I want to do this. I want to invest in companies that are making a difference in the world, that are solving the climate crisis, that are addressing income inequality, crime, poverty, whatever it might be. There are ways to do all of that with the investment world right now. Your investment professionals aren't probably aware or going to tell you about those things. But if you ask, they'll figure out a way to accommodate those kinds of requests. If your definition of success as you sort of move through the world is a 2,000 square foot house or a 3,000 square foot house or a 5,000 square foot house, that's a very different world than people whose definition of success is living in a 1,000 square foot house or living in, sort of an apartment complex. So again, going back to those individual decisions matter. I do think that the message that I would send into the world is that just be thoughtful about, what is that next car that you're going to purchase? Can you afford an electric car versus an internal combustion engine car? Can you afford a used car instead of a new car? Just being thoughtful in all of the decisions that people sort of routinely take for granted. I know that that's hard.
And a lot of people might think about that and,
it's overwhelming.
Right, yeah. Exactly. So the quote, "Do what you can with what you have at this time," comes to my mind. Yeah. And there are so many resources out there, so many experts in the field across all industries and sectors that are happy to answer questions for you if you do have questions. And two other things that came to mind when you were talking about that is one, integrating more sustainability into your lifestyle is not a deprivation.
No.
There are so many quality of life enhancements that come from integrating sustainability into your lifestyle, whether that be the clothes that you're wearing, the cosmetics that you put on your skin, the food you put in your body, the way you actively transport around your community. And so I think it's really important to flip that perspective of this is not a minimizing of life's luxuries.
Right.
In fact, you're enhancing other areas that we may be deprived in currently. And then I'm also a really big believer in the power of individual action and positive ripple effects, especially right now with social media and our Instagram influencers. I see people all the time posting about the new healthy organic foods or non-GMO foods, non-phthalate, non-paraben skincare products.
Yep.
And so a lot of this is becoming more mainstream. And with that power of social media, it's even easier to spread that positive message, and people latch on to positive messages. And so I completely agree with you that there is incredible power in one individual.
For too long, we've used fear to drive people to do the right thing. And I think we've reached the limit of how successful fear can be. Why not offer this future of possibility of, all the good things that we can create? Because we can do that. And so that's where we should be focused and where we should be headed.
That is a great way to wrap up today. Are there any other thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Thank you for the invitation to spend some time talking with you.
Thank you for spending time with us today, and we always appreciate your perspective. Thanks for joining us today on the Forward Sustainably podcast. Today's episode is supported by our campus partners in the University of Wisconsin system, including Parkside, Oshkosh, Green Bay, Superior, River Falls, and Stout. If you found today's topic interesting, feel free to rate and subscribe wherever you find your favorite podcasts. If you have comments, questions, or recommendations for future shows, contact us at forwardsustainably@uwex.edu and make sure to find us online at sustain.wisconsin.edu.